I do want to get to those, but firstly, I want to pick you up on some points you made there about the demands on the economy. So when we look at things that were highlighted, like the NDIS, health, the aged care sector, and how that melds with increasing life expectancy, more and more older Australians, as we know, I mean, those costs are really going to explode.
They are. So far, Australia has managed that okay, one way or another. But the challenges continue to mount. Basically, over the next 40 years, the share of Australians over the age of 65 will double. The share of Australians over the age of 85 will triple. And older Australians are more expensive Australians in terms of taxpayers, and they draw on taxpayers. That will be a considerable challenge. But at least we are starting the change. There was another intergenerational report just 2 years ago. It thought that this year, existing government debt, net debt, as a share of national income would be over 40%. In practice, it's only a smidge over 20%. So we begin all these challenges much better placed than we had feared even just a couple of years ago.
And Chris, I saw you make the point elsewhere that we need to remember that the key isn't debt, it's the cost of debt. Why do you think it's so important for Australians to understand that difference?
And Australia does have a lot of debt. To be clear, as I just noted, it's looking a lot better than we feared 2 years ago. And also, as this report today says, it's a lot lower here in Australia relative to our incomes than you see in most other nations around the world. But we've taken on that debt before these challenges become more costly. And that combination essentially says that the cost of debt to taxpayers will rise. At the moment, about 0.7% of national income, set to double over the years ahead. So that is one of the big five costs that the government keeps talking about that it will have to juggle one way or another.
It was interesting to hear from the Treasurer about what all of this means for the future workforce in this country. We've heard the opposition today saying that they think Jim Chalmers is laying the groundwork essentially for higher taxes. Do you think that higher taxes are really unavoidable when you look at that outlook and look at the workforce into the future?
I would say that hard choices are unavoidable. It is true, for all the good budgetary news of the last couple of years, it is true that the ongoing costs of running Australia are now more expensive than earlier feared. So, you see that in the cost of a range of social services. A bunch of Royal Commissions keep telling us that. You are seeing it in the cost of defence. The world is a more dangerous place than we thought a while ago. And if the cost of running Australia is higher than we expected, and that's, even before we add in the challenges of ageing, that says we've got to do something about it. Now, you can do that by cutting some spending. You can do that by raising taxes. Most logically, anybody sensible is going to say it's got to be some sort of a compromise to do both for it to stick. But yeah, Australians will need to take some difficult choices around taxes and around spending in the years ahead.
And Chris, when we talk about the world being a more dangerous place, wars, security issues aside, climate change plays into that as well. So much has been said and written about the impact on our lifestyles, on our environment from climate change. This paper also looked at the impact of climate change on productivity, and the warning there was pretty stark.
Yeah, on a range of sectors, basically, climate change is going to get in the way of us doing our jobs as well as we could otherwise do. We will be hotter, we will be pressured in all sorts of costs. And speaking of costs, one of the most striking illustrations in today's report was the cost of extreme events to insurance companies here in Australia. That is a straight line rising fast. And of course, they pass those costs on to us. One way or another, the costs of climate change are already hitting family finances. They're already hitting the budgets of businesses. They will increasingly hit the lives of everyday Australians, and hence what taxpayers have to do in the years ahead.
Chris, just finally, you mentioned there are a lot of negatives in this report, but what can we look forward to? What was the shining light out of this to end on a positive note, hopefully?
Look, two things. One is that our debt is actually a lot lower than earlier feared, a lot, basically half. But the other is the NDIS. There is a framework in place, a decision that says we will cap the growth in NDIS costs. If it weren't for that, the numbers shown today were really quite stark. The NDIS was absolutely central to the risk of a big budget blowout. There is a policy to get on top of that. We still, it was announced in May, we still don't have a lot of detail around that, but that is a massively important thing about the future.